The abandoned mining station orbited the dead moon like a forgotten tombstone, its metallic hull scarred by centuries of micrometeorite impacts. Commander Zektar of the Galactic Empire's Third Enforcement Fleet watched it through the view screen of his flagship, the Dominator. His four eyes narrowed with contempt. These humans had ignored 3 summons to surrender their primitive world to the Empire's protection. Now, they would learn the price of defiance. Pathetic, Zektar muttered, his mandibles clicking in disgust. They hide in derelict stations while we bring 500 warships to their doorstep. Scan that heap of scrap. I want to know if any humans are foolish enough to be aboard. Lieutenant Vornash bent over his console, tentacles dancing across the controls. Sir, I'm detecting minimal power signatures. Emergency systems only. Wait. His voice trailed off, confusion evident in his triple-toned speech. There's something else. A single life sign, but the readings are strange. Strange how? Zektar demanded. The biosignature is human, but there's something interfering with our scans. Some kind of energy field around the being. Our computers can't identify it. Zektar's primary arms gestured dismissively. One human in a dead station. Probably a scavenger who got trapped. Send a boarding party to retrieve them. We'll add another slave to our collection before we glass their homeworld. Deep within the mining station, in a chamber that hadn't been opened in over 200 years, Sarah Chun floated in zero gravity, her eyes closed in meditation. She wasn't a scavenger. She wasn't trapped. She was waiting. The neural implant at the base of her skull hummed with activity, processing terabytes of data every second. Around her, barely visible distortions in the air marked the presence of something that shouldn't exist, a prototype defensive system that Earth government had deemed too dangerous to ever use. They called it the Prometheus Protocol, and Sarah was its only successful test subject. She felt the Empire's boarding shuttle attached to the station's hull, felt the vibrations through the metal as cutting tools breached the airlock. 12 soldiers, her enhanced senses told her. Heavy armor, plasma weapons, standard Empire subjugation kit. They thought they were hunting a scared human survivor. They were wrong. Sarah opened her eyes, and, for a moment, they glowed with an inner light that had nothing to do with nature and everything to do with a marriage of human consciousness and impossible technology. The Prometheus Protocol hadn't just enhanced her. It had made her something new. Something Earth's military had feared so much they'd hidden her away, hoping the galaxy would never push humanity far enough to need her. But now the Empire was here, and Earth's forgotten prototype was about to remind the galaxy why humans had survived every extinction event their planet had thrown at them. The boarding party moved through the station's corridors with practiced efficiency. Shock troopers from a dozen conquered worlds. They'd done this thousands of times before. Humans were soft, weak creatures who relied on projectile weapons and fragile ships. The Empire's assessment had marked them as a level 2 threat, barely worth the fuel to conquer. Sergeant Crixal led the squad, his 6 legs carrying him smoothly through the zero-gravity environment. His species had evolved in asteroid fields, making him perfect for shipboarding operations. Thermal scans show the human is 3 sections ahead. He reported through his comm, probably cowering in a corner. Sir, one of his soldiers called out, I'm detecting unusual energy readings ahead. They don't match anything in our databases. Crixal checked his own scanner and frowned. The readings were bizarre, organized patterns that seemed almost like they were alive, shifting and adapting to their scans. Probably old human tech malfunctioning. Stay alert, but remember, we've conquered 80 species. Humans are nothing special. They reached the sealed door to the central chamber. Crixal gestured for the breacher to move forward, but before the soldier could attach the charges, the door opened on its own. Beyond was darkness, broken only by the faint emergency lighting casting red shadows on the walls. Human, Crixal barked in translated speech. By order of the Galactic Empire, you will surrender immediately. Resistance will result in death. A female voice interrupted from the darkness. Yes, I know how your empire operates. You give species a choice, slavery or extinction. You've done it 83 times. Actually, I've been reviewing your history. The soldiers raised their weapons, targeting systems searching for the source of the voice. Their scans showed the human was there, but they couldn't get a precise lock. It was like trying to target smoke. "Step into the light with your hands visible," Crixal ordered. "This is your final warning." Sarah Chun stepped forward, but she didn't raise her hands. She was young by human standards, perhaps 30 years old, wearing a simple gray jumpsuit that looked like it had been standard issue centuries ago. Her black hair floated freely in the zero gravity, and her dark eyes held a calmness that made Crixal's instincts scream danger. "You know what's funny about your empire?" Sarah asked conversationally. "You judge species by their military technology. Ships, weapons, armor, all the hardware. But you never ask about the software. Enough talk." Soldiers stun her. 12 plasma bolts fired simultaneously. In any normal circumstance, even one would have been enough to drop a human. But the bolts never reached their target. They stopped in midair, frozen like insects in amber, their energy crackling but contained. Sarah tilted her head, studying them with the fascination of a scientist examining specimens. Plasma weapons. Effective against most organic targets. Temperature of about 30,000 degrees. Impressive, really. She waved her hand, and the plasma bolts dissipated harmlessly. But ultimately, just excited particles following predictable patterns. The Prometheus Protocol taught me that everything, energy, matter, space, time, it's all just information. And information can be rewritten. Crixal's mind reeled. No species had technology that could simply dismiss plasma fire. "What are you?" "I'm what happens when humanity gets desperate," Sarah replied. 2 centuries ago, Earth detected your empire's expansion. We knew we couldn't match your fleets, so we tried something else. We tried to evolve. Not our bodies. Those are too slow to change. We evolved our minds. The air around Sarah began to shimmer, and the soldiers' weapons started to vibrate in their hands. One by one, the plasma rifles disassembled themselves, components floating away in perfect order as if invisible hands were carefully taking them apart. "The human brain," Sarah continued, "is capable of processing 38,000 trillion operations per second. But we only use a fraction of that potential. The Prometheus Protocol changes that. It creates a bridge between human consciousness and the quantum field that underlies reality. It turns thought into action, will into power. Impossible Kriegsalgast. No species has mastered consciousness manipulation. The energy requirements alone would be enormous, yes. Unless you found a way to tap directly into zero-point energy. Unless you could convince the universe itself to provide the power you need." Sarah smiled, and it wasn't entirely human anymore. Earth's scientists succeeded. They created me, and then they got scared. The station began to tremble, not from any external force, but from something far more fundamental. Reality itself was responding to Sarah's will. "You see, Sergeant, your empire made a classic mistake. You assumed that because humans were young, because our ships were primitive, that we were weak. But we're the species that split the atom before we had computers. We're the species that looked at the stars and decided to throw ourselves into the void with chemical rockets and prayers. We're the species that turns our greatest fears into our greatest strengths." The boarding party tried to retreat, but the corridor behind them sealed itself, metal flowing like liquid to block their path. They were trapped with something that shouldn't exist, something that violated every law of physics they understood. "The scientists who created me wanted to make more," Sarah said. "An army of evolved humans. But the first tests after me didn't go well. The human mind, when given unlimited power, doesn't always stay sane. Some test subjects became gods in their own minds. Others simply ceased to exist, dispersing into the quantum foam. So they stopped the program. They hid me away. They decided it was better to face extinction than to risk becoming something inhuman." On the Dominator's bridge, Commander Zektar watched his boarding party's life signs flicker and fail one by one. Not from weapons fire. The readings simply showed them ceasing to exist, as if reality had decided they were no longer necessary. "What is happening over there?" he roared. "All ships, target that station. Destroy it." But Even as hundreds of ships brought their weapons to bear, Sarah Chun was no longer truly in the station. She existed partially in real space, partially in the quantum realm, spread across dimensions that the Empire's science couldn't even detect. The Prometheus Protocol had been humanity's attempt to create the ultimate defensive weapon. Not a ship or a gun, but a human being who could rewrite the rules of reality itself. The scientists had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, and then buried their success out of fear. But now the Empire was here, threatening Earth with extinction, and humanity's forgotten prototype was about to show them why some weapons should never be awakened. Sarah felt the targeting locks of 500 ships focus on the station. She felt the space around her twist as weapons charged. The Empire thought overwhelming firepower was the answer to every problem. They were about to learn that when you face an enemy who can manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe, numbers mean nothing. Computer, she said to the station's ancient AI, send a message to Earth. Tell them the Prometheus Protocol is active. Tell them. She paused, feeling the weight of what she was about to do. Tell them I'm sorry for what I'm about to become. The first barrage from the Empire's fleet turned the mining station into superheated gas. Antimatter torpedoes, fusion beams, and kinetic projectiles converged on the spot where Sarah had been. The explosion was visible from Earth's surface, a new star burning briefly in the night sky. Commander Zektar watched the destruction with satisfaction. Whatever abomination the humans had created, it was gone now. All ships form up for planetary assault. These primitives will learn the cost of Commander, Vornash interrupted, his voice trembling. Sensors are detecting something impossible. On the view screen, where the station had been, space itself was wrong. It rippled like water, twisted like fabric, and at its center was a human figure floating in the vacuum without any protective gear. Sarah Chun existed there, unharmed by the cold of space or the lack of atmosphere, surrounded by an aura of bent light and warped reality. Ow! Sector vis spirit. Sarah's voice echoed through every comm system in the fleet simultaneously, though her lips didn't move. Your Empire catalogs threats based on technology level. You never considered that consciousness itself might be the ultimate technology, that a single human mind, properly awakened, could be more dangerous than all your fleets combined. She raised her hand, and the fabric of space-time responded. The nearest Empire destroyer simply folded in on itself, its million-ton mass compressed into a sphere no larger than a marble before vanishing entirely. The crew never had time to scream. 200 years ago, Earth created me as a last resort, Sarah continued. They gave me the power to manipulate reality at the quantum level, to see the code that runs the universe and rewrite it. They were so proud until they realized what they'd done, until they understood that they created something that could unmake existence itself if it chose to. Another gesture, and 3 more ships ceased to exist, their atoms scattered across dimensions the Empire couldn't even perceive. The fleet began firing wildly, pouring enough firepower into space to crack a moon. But the weapons fire bent around Sarah, following impossible trajectories that led back to their origins. Ships destroyed themselves with their own weapons, reality inverting cause and effect at her whim. Your mistake, Sarah said, her form beginning to grow, to expand beyond the constraints of normal space, was threatening Earth. You see, the Prometheus Protocol doesn't just give me power. It connects me to humanity itself. Every human life you threaten, every child who looks up at your ships in fear, every parent who wonders if their family will see tomorrow. I feel them all. Their survival instinct becomes mine. Their desperate need to protect becomes my purpose. The Empire's fleet was in chaos. Ships collided as their navigation systems fed them false data. Weapons overloaded as their safety protocols reversed. Crews watched in horror as their companions aged decades in seconds or reversed to pre-birth states. The laws of physics had become suggestions, and Sarah Chun was rewriting them all. But with each use of her power, Sarah felt herself slipping further from humanity. The Prometheus Protocol was designed to be temporary, a brief fusion of human consciousness with cosmic forces. She'd been active for less than an hour, and already she could feel her mind expanding beyond what any human brain was meant to contain. She thought of Earth, of the billions of people who didn't even know she existed. They deserve to live free, not under the Empire's boot. They deserve a chance to reach the stars on their own terms, to make their own mistakes, and find their own glory. I was hidden away because they feared what I might become, Sarah said, her voice now coming from everywhere and nowhere. They were right to fear, but they were wrong to hide me. Sometimes, to save what you love, you have to become what you fear. Commander Zektar watched his fleet die. Ships that had conquered worlds, that had stood victorious over 80 species, were being swatted like insects by a single human who had transcended every limitation of biology and physics. His tactical display showed red. 300 ships lost in minutes, the others scattered and fleeing in terror. "All ships retreat," he screamed. "Fall back to Empire space. Alert the Council. Earth has a weapon beyond our comprehension." But even as the survivors tried to flee, Sarah was there. Not moving through space, but simply existing wherever she chose to be. She appeared on bridge after bridge, walking through walls and shields as if they were illusions. And perhaps, to her, they were. "No," she said simply. "You don't get to run back and bring a bigger fleet. You don't get to turn Earth into another cautionary tale about resisting the Empire." The fleeing ships found themselves back where they started, space folding to deny them escape. Some crews went mad from the impossibility of it. Others simply shut down, their minds unable to process a reality where the laws of physics were merely guidelines. Sarah felt the protocol pushing her further from humanity with each moment. She could see the quantum threads that connected all things, could feel the heartbeat of stars and the dreams of void. She was becoming something vast and terrible, something that could reshape galaxies with a thought. But she held on to one truth. She was doing this for Earth, for humanity, for the right of her species to exist free and unafraid. The Dominator was the last ship remaining, its crew huddled in terror as reality warped around them. Commander Zektar stood rigid at his post, a lifetime of military discipline keeping him upright even as his world collapsed. Sarah appeared before him, no longer entirely human in appearance. Her form shifted and flowed, sometimes solid, sometimes energy, sometimes something that had no name. "Your empire ends here," she said. "Not Earth, not humanity. Your empire. Your one being," Zektar managed. "The Empire has thousands of worlds, millions of ships. You can't I?" Sarah smiled, and in that expression was the terrible certainty of a being who had transcended mortal limitations. "Your empire exists because weaker species can't fight back, because you have the ships and weapons to enforce your will. But what happens when those advantages mean nothing? What happens when a single human can unmake your fleets with a thought?" She gestured, and Zektar saw it. Through the view screen, through space itself, he saw Empire worlds across the galaxy. Saw their defense fleets suddenly question why they served. Saw their weapons refuse to function. Saw the very concept of the Empire begin to unravel as Sarah rewrote reality on a galactic scale. "This is what Earth created," she said. "This is what they feared. A human with the power of a god and the protective instincts of a cornered animal. Your empire made the mistake of cornering us." The Dominator began to dissolve, its atoms deciding they'd rather be somewhere else. Zektar's last coherent thought was a warning he'd never get to deliver, that humanity's true weapon wasn't their ships or their soldiers, but their willingness to become monsters to protect what they loved. Sarah Chun floated in the void where the Empire's fleet had been, surrounded by the quantum echoes of 500 warships that no longer existed in this reality. The debris field that should have been there wasn't. She had unmade them so completely that even their component atoms had been redistributed across the cosmos. Only she remained, a human figure wrapped in impossibilities, struggling to hold onto her identity as the Prometheus Protocol threatened to expand her consciousness beyond all boundaries. Through her enhanced perception, She could feel Earth below. 7 billion minds, unaware that their existence had just been preserved by humanity's darkest secret. She could sense their dreams, their fears, their small daily concerns that seemed so trivial compared to the cosmic forces she now commanded. A child in Beijing worried about a math test. A farmer in Kenya wondered if the rains would come. A couple in New York argued about dinner plans. Such beautiful, mundane humanity. She wanted to protect it all. But the protocol whispered seductive truths. She could do more than protect. She could perfect. She could reach into those billions of minds and erase their fears, their doubts, their limitations. She could remake humanity into something glorious, something that would never again fear the darkness between stars. No, Sarah said aloud, her voice creating ripples in space-time. That's not protection. That's domination. But even as she rejected the temptation, she felt the protocol's influence growing. The human brain wasn't designed to process universal constants as simple variables. Every second she maintained this level of power, she lost a piece of her original self. On Earth, in a bunker buried beneath the Antarctic ice, alarms that hadn't sounded in 2 centuries screamed to life. Dr. Marcus Webb, descendant of the original Prometheus protocol team, stared at readings that shouldn't be possible. "Dear God," he whispered, "she's active. After all this time, she's active." His assistant, Dr. Elena Vasquez, rushed to the displays. The containment field on Mining Station Omega 7 is gone. The entire station is gone. And these energy readings... She trailed off, her face pale. "Marcus, these match the theoretical maximum from the original projections. She's operating at 100% capacity." Webb's hands trembled as he pulled up archived files. His great-grandmother had been part of the team that created Sarah Chun, had left detailed notes about why the project was terminated. Prometheus Protocol Test Subject 1, Sarah Chun. Enhanced successfully, but psychological degradation begins after approximately 90 minutes of full activation. Subject begins to lose human perspective, develops God-complex symptoms. Recommended immediate containment if activation exceeds 60 minutes. How long has she been active? Webb checked the timestamps from the Empire's fleet arrival. 47 minutes. They watched the monitors as gravitational anomalies rippled out from Sarah's position. Space stations throughout the solar system reported instruments going haywire. On Mars, a terraforming project detected local reality fluctuations that turned sand briefly into water before reverting. The universe itself was responding to her presence. "We have to activate the failsafe," Elena said, "before she loses herself completely." Webb hesitated. The failsafe was built into the protocol itself, a quantum virus that would force Sarah's consciousness back to baseline human, stripping her of her powers, but potentially killing her in the process. It had never been tested. The Empire's fleet is gone. She destroyed them all. But if she continues to escalate, if she decides that humanity needs to be improved for its own protection. Elena didn't finish. They both knew the scenarios. The original Prometheus team had run thousands of simulations. In 60% of them, an fully activated subject eventually decided that free will itself was a threat to human survival. Above Earth's atmosphere, Sarah felt the moment when the first Empire ship outside the solar system received the final transmissions from Zektar's fleet. She could perceive it happening in real time, though it was light years away. The impossible destruction of an entire invasion fleet by a single human would spread through the Empire like wildfire. Some would dismiss it as propaganda. Others would demand verification. But eventually, they would come to understand that humanity had created something that violated every rule of galactic warfare. She could stop it here. She could reach across space and silence those transmissions, prevent the Empire from learning what had happened. But that would require extending her influence across thousands of light years, pushing the protocol even further beyond its limits. Instead, she let the messages spread. Let the Empire know fear. A new presence touched her expanded consciousness, a quantumly encrypted signal from Earth. The failsafe activation codes. They were trying to shut her down. For a nanosecond that stretched into subjective hours, Sarah felt rage. How dare they? She had saved them all, destroyed an invasion fleet that would have enslaved humanity, and their response was to try to cage her again. She could block the signal with trivial ease, could reach down to Antarctica and unmake the bunker and everyone in it. But that nanosecond of rage terrified her more than the Empire's fleet had. It wasn't her thought. It was the protocols. The distinction between Sarah-chan and the cosmic force she wielded was blurring. She didn't block the failsafe, but she didn't accept it either. Instead, she held it in quantum superposition, existing in a state of both activated and not activated, buying herself time. Dr. Webb, she spoke, her voice manifesting directly in the bunker without need for communication equipment. Both scientists jumped, looking around wildly. I know what you're trying to do. I understand why. The protocol is trying to change me, trying to make me something that sees humanity as cells to be optimized rather than people to be protected. Sarah, Webb's voice cracked. You're still you? For now. But I can feel it happening. Every moment I maintain this power, I lose a piece of myself. The original team was right to fear this. She paused, and when she spoke again, there was infinite sadness in her voice. But they were wrong to hide it. The Empire would have destroyed Earth today, enslaved billions, and they'll try again unless... Unless what? Sarah turned her perception outward beyond the solar system to the vast network of the Galactic Empire. Thousands of worlds, hundreds of species bound in servitude, a civilization built on the principle that might made right. She could see it all. The throne world where the Emperor received reports of his fleet's destruction. The slave markets where conquered species were sold. The academies where young soldiers were taught that other species existed only to serve. Unless I become the very thing you fear, she said. Unless I use this power to end the Empire permanently. Not just their fleet, but their entire civilization. Their philosophy. Their future. The bunker was silent except for the hum of equipment. Finally, Elena spoke. That's genocide. No, that's liberation. I can see every slave on every Empire world. I can feel their pain, their desperation. The Empire has destroyed 83 species. How many more will they destroy if I simply retreat now? How many billions will suffer because I was too human to act? It was the classic dilemma, magnified to cosmic scale. Sarah had the power to end tyranny across the galaxy, to free countless beings from oppression. But using that power would require her to abandon her humanity, to become the very type of unopposable force that she fought against. There has to be another way, Webb said. The protocol was designed for defense, not conquest. The protocol was designed by humans who couldn't imagine its full potential, Sarah replied. They thought in terms of weapons and shields, of physics and energy. They didn't understand that consciousness itself is the fundamental force of the universe, that a sufficiently awakened mind can rewrite the rules that govern reality. Through her enhanced perception, she detected movement in the outer solar system, probe ships sent by neighboring systems to investigate the gravitational anomalies. The galaxy was already responding to her existence. Soon, every spacefaring species would know that humanity had produced something unprecedented. I'm going to show you something, Sarah said. Not to frighten you, but so you understand the choice we face. Reality shifted in the bunker. The walls became transparent, revealing not Antarctic ice, but visions from across the galaxy. Webb and Elena saw Empire soldiers executing resistance fighters on a world of crystal forests. They saw children separated from parents to be raised as loyal servants. They saw entire cultures erased, languages forbidden, histories rewritten to glorify the Empire. This is happening right now, Sarah said, on thousands of worlds, and it will continue happening unless someone stops it. I have the power to stop it. The question is whether I can do so and remain human. The visions faded, leaving the two scientists shaken. Elena was crying, though she tried to hide it. Webb looked older, as if the weight of galactic suffering had aged him in moments. What are you asking us? Webb whispered. I'm asking you to trust me, to give me time to find a solution that doesn't require me to become a tyrant to defeat tyranny. The failsafe you're holding, I won't fight it. If I go too far, if I start to lose myself completely, activate it. Kill me if you have to. But give me a chance to find another way. Webb's hand hovered over the fail-safe controls. 3 generations of his family had guarded this responsibility, hoping it would never be needed. Now, the moment of decision was his. How much time do you need? Sarah calculated possibilities at speeds human minds couldn't comprehend. She could see probability streams, potential futures branching out like an infinite tree. In sum, she became a benevolent god, guiding humanity to greatness. In others, she became a monster that made the Empire look benign. And in a precious few, 72 hours, she said, give me 3 days to find a path that saves everyone without losing myself. If I fail, if I start a change, you'll know. The monitors will show neural pattern deviation beyond acceptable parameters. Promise me you'll act if that happens. Webb looked at Elena, saw his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. They were gambling with the fate of not just Earth, but possibly the entire galaxy. But Sarah was right. The Empire would return, and conventional weapons couldn't stop them. 72 hours, he agreed. But we're monitoring everything. The moment your neural patterns show irreversible deviation, you'll do what needs to be done. I understand. Sarah's presence began to fade from the bunker. Thank you for trusting me, for giving me a chance to remain human while doing what needs to be done. As her consciousness withdrew, Webb slumped in his chair. What have we just agreed to? Elena was already pulling up monitoring equipment, establishing quantum links to track Sarah's neural patterns in real time. We've agreed to let her try to square a circle, to use godlike power while remaining human. The original team said it was impossible. The original team also said powered flight was impossible until the Wright brothers proved them wrong. Webb activated security protocols, sealing the bunker. For the next 3 days, they would be humanity's failsafe, ready to kill their savior if she became their destroyer. In space above Earth, Sarah Chan began to move. Not through physical motion, but by folding space around herself, stepping between points in the universe as easily as walking through doorways. She had a plan forming, a desperate gambit that might thread the needle between salvation and damnation. The Empire had created its dominion through fear and force. They had made themselves the apex predators of the galaxy, secure in the knowledge that no single force could challenge them. But they had never faced a human pushed to the edge, given power beyond measure, and asked to save everyone while saving herself. Sarah's first stop was the Empire's throne world, a planet of towering spires and enslaved populations that existed solely to serve the Emperor's glory. She didn't attack, didn't announce herself. She simply observed, her consciousness spread thin enough to avoid detection while gathering information. The Emperor was ancient by most species standards, a being who had ruled for 300 years through cunning and cruelty. His throne room was a monument to conquest, decorated with artifacts from every species the Empire had subjugated. Sarah could feel the psychic weight of suffering that permeated the place. But more interesting than the Emperor were the data streams flowing through the throne world's networks. Military deployments, economic reports, social control algorithms. The machinery of oppression laid bare to her enhanced perception. The Empire was vast and powerful, but it was also rigid, dependent on established hierarchies and predictable responses. Sarah smiled, a very human expression despite her transformed state. The Empire's strength was also its weakness. They had built a civilization on the assumption that power flowed from the top down, that control was maintained through fear. They had never considered what would happen if someone removed those assumptions. She began to work, not with the dramatic gestures that had destroyed the fleet, but with subtle touches. A financial algorithm here, a communication protocol there. Small changes that would ripple through the Empire's systems like viruses, creating cascading effects that wouldn't be noticed until too late. On a mining world, automated systems received new instructions, rerouting resources from military production to civilian infrastructure. On a garrison planet, training simulations began to include scenarios where peaceful resolution was rewarded over violent suppression. On trade stations, Universal translators started adding subtle context to conversations, helping different species understand each other better rather than maintaining the artificial barriers the Empire preferred. It was sabotage on a galactic scale, but not the violent kind the Empire would expect. Sarah was attacking the very foundations of their control, not by destroying them, but by gently nudging them toward evolution. But with each change she made, each system she touched, the protocol pushed harder against her humanity. She could feel her perspective shifting, beginning to see sapient beings as patterns of thought rather than individuals. The temptation to simply reshape them all into something better grew stronger. No, she reminded herself. Evolution, not revolution. Choice, not compulsion. Her next target was more ambitious. The Empire maintained control partly through a careful program of historical revision. Conquered species were taught that they had always been destined for servitude, that the Empire had saved them from their own inadequacy. The truth that many had been thriving civilizations before conquest was systematically erased. Sarah found the Central Archives, quantum encrypted databases that held the real histories of 83 civilizations. With surgical precision, she began to leak this information into public networks. Not as a flood that would trigger security responses, but as a steady trickle. A recovered document here, an authenticated artifact there. Enough to make beings across the Empire begin to question what they had been taught. On the throne world, the Emperor received reports of the anomalies. Financial irregularities, communication glitches, unauthorized data access. His advisors assured him they were unrelated, merely the growing pains of an empire that spanned thousands of light years. But the Emperor had not ruled for 3 centuries by ignoring patterns. Double the guard on all critical systems, he ordered, and find out what really happened to the Fifth Fleet. I don't believe this nonsense about a single human destroying 500 ships. Sarah heard the order propagate through the Empire's networks. She could prevent it, could twist the Emperor's words, or block them entirely. But that would be direct control, the kind of domination she was trying to avoid. Instead, she let the order stand, but ensured that the investigators sent to Earth's system would find exactly what she wanted them to find. The debris field she created was a masterwork of deception. Scattered remains that suggested not a single superhuman, but a hidden fleet of advanced vessels, a secret armada that humanity had been building for generations. Let the Empire believe that humans had conventional but superior technology. It would make them cautious, perhaps even willing to negotiate rather than simply attack again. As she worked, Sarah became aware of other eyes upon her. Not the Empire's limited sensors, but something far more subtle. Throughout the galaxy, on worlds both within and outside the Empire's control, beings of significant psychic ability had noticed the distortions her actions created. Most dismissed them as cosmic background noise, but a few understood that something unprecedented was happening. On a water world called Cerulean Deep, an ancient cephalopod philosopher named Depths of Contemplation extended its consciousness toward the anomaly. Its species had achieved spaceflight through psychic manipulation rather than technology, and they recognized the signature of a mind touching the fundamental forces of reality. Young one. Asterisk, its thoughts reached out across light years. Asterisk, you swim in dangerous currents. The deep powers you touch have claimed many who thought themselves strong enough to master them. Asterisk, Sarah paused in her work, startled by the contact. She had known other psychic species existed, but none in Earth's databases approached this level of refinement. I know the risks, she responded, but my people face extinction if I don't act. All peoples face extinction eventually. Is the nature of time. But some extinctions create worse things than death. When consciousness expands beyond its origins, when power grows beyond wisdom, the result is not salvation, but suffering on scales you cannot imagine. Asterisk, the aliens' words carried weight beyond their meaning, psychic harmonics that spoke of personal experience. This being, or its species, had seen what happened when someone tried to use ultimate power for good intentions. Then, tell me, asterisk, Sarah asked, how do I save my people without becoming the very evil I fight against? There was a long pause, thoughts moving at the speed of contemplation rather than light. Asterisk, you don't. You accept that salvation and damnation are often the same path viewed from different angles. The question is not how to avoid becoming evil, but how to ensure the evil you become serves a greater good. Asterisk, that's not helpful. Asterisk, truth rarely is. But here is something that might be. The Empire's strength comes not from its fleets or its soldiers, but from the idea of inevitability. They have convinced the galaxy that their rule is natural law, as unchangeable as gravity. You cannot destroy an idea with force. You can only replace it with a better idea. Asterisk, the connection faded as depths of contemplation withdrew its consciousness. But its words lingered, mixing with Sarah's own desperate plans. A better idea. Not just sabotage or destruction, but creation. Building something that would make the Empire obsolete rather than simply destroying it. She had been thinking too small, too human. The protocol offered her the power to reshape reality, but she had been using it like a weapon rather than a tool of creation. What if, instead of fighting the Empire, she made it irrelevant? The plan that formed was audacious beyond measure. It would require her to push the protocol further than ever before, to risk losing herself completely. But it might offer a path to victory that didn't require her to become a tyrant. First, she needed allies. The Empire had enemies, species that had resisted conquest or existed outside its borders. If she could unite them, not through force, but through opportunity, Sarah began reaching out, her consciousness touching minds across the galaxy. Not controlling, just communicating. Offering visions of what could be. A galactic community based on cooperation rather than domination, where species traded ideas and resources freely rather than under threat of destruction. Some minds recoiled from the contact, too suspicious or frightened to listen. Others were intrigued but cautious. A few, those who had been fighting the Empire for generations, responded with desperate hope. On a rogue planet hidden in a nebula, the Free Fleet received her message. They were pirates and rebels to the Empire, but to their own people they were the last hope of independence. Their admiral, a crystalline being whose thoughts moved through light rather than neurons, considered Sarah's proposal. "You offer us hope," the admiral signaled back. "But hope has been offered before. What makes you different?" In response, Sarah didn't send words, but a demonstration. Across the Free Fleet's hidden base, every piece of technology suddenly operated at perfect efficiency. Engines that had been held together with prayers hummed smoothly. Weapons that had been unreliable suddenly calibrated themselves. It lasted only seconds, but the message was clear. She had the power to transform their rebellion from desperate survival to actual victory. "What do you want in return?" the admiral asked. "Nothing. Everything. I want you to be ready when the moment comes. The Empire will not fall to conquest, but to irrelevance. When beings across the galaxy realize they have another choice, a better choice, they will need examples to follow. Be that example." Similar conversations played out across dozens of worlds. Sarah planted seeds, not of rebellion, but of possibility. She gave no orders, made no demands. She simply showed beings what they could become without the Empire's chains. Back on Earth, Webb and Elena monitored her neural patterns with growing concern. The readings showed increasing deviation from baseline humanity. Not the megalomaniacal spike they feared, but something else, a broadening of perspective that threatened to dilute her human identity entirely. "She's spreading herself too thin," Elena observed, "trying to be everywhere at once. Her sense of self is fragmenting." Webb studied the quantum field fluctuations emanating from Sarah's actions. Or maybe she's trying to avoid the God complex by never focusing her full power in one place. Distributed consciousness instead of centralized authority. That's not sustainable. The human psyche needs coherence, a sense of self. If she keeps this up, she'll lose herself not to power, but to dissolution. Webb checked the countdown timer. 51 hours remaining. "Do we pull the plug?" Elena hesitated. The monitoring systems showed Sarah's actions across the galaxy, subtle changes that were already having effects. Rebellion movements were coordinating for the first time in decades. Independent worlds were forming defensive pacts. The Empire's responses were becoming increasingly frantic as their control algorithms failed to predict these new patterns. Not yet. She's still accomplishing her goal, still protecting Earth. As long as some core of Sarah Chun remains. In space, Sarah felt the strain they were monitoring. Each contact she made, each system she touched, pulled at her consciousness. She was becoming less a person and more a presence, a force for change spread across the galaxy. It was a different kind of transformation than the protocol's creators had feared, but perhaps no less dangerous. She needed an anchor, something to hold her human identity together while she worked. Her thoughts turned to Earth, to the billions of people she was trying to protect. She reached out, not to communicate, but simply to feel. The farmer in Kenya whose crops were growing. The child in Beijing who had passed her math test. The couple in New York who had made up after their argument. Such small lives by galactic standards. Such insignificant concerns compared to the fate of civilizations. But they were real, immediate human. They were why she fought. Sarah held on to those connections as she continued her work. The Empire's throne world was in chaos now, conflicting reports pouring in from across their territory. Financial systems were producing impossible results. Military deployments were being questioned by previously loyal commanders. Historical revelations were sparking protests on worlds that had been pacified for centuries. The Emperor himself stood before his strategic displays, watching his dominion crack like ice under spring thaw. "Find a source," he commanded. "Whatever is doing this, find it and destroy it." But how could they find something that existed everywhere and nowhere? How could they destroy an idea whose time had come? Sarah felt the Empire's sensors searching, their most advanced technology trying to trace the quantum signatures of her actions. Let them look. They were searching for a weapon, a ship, a conventional enemy. They would never understand that their true opponent was the collective hope of every being they had ever oppressed. Her work was nearly complete now. Not the overthrow of the Empire. That would take years, perhaps decades. But the framework for its inevitable fall was in place. Economic alternatives that bypassed imperial control. Communication networks that couldn't be censored. Historical truths that couldn't be reburied. And, most importantly, the knowledge spreading across the galaxy that the Empire could be defied. But the effort was killing her. Not physically. The Prometheus Protocol had moved her beyond such concerns. But her consciousness, spread across thousands of light years, was beginning to lose cohesion. She could feel herself fragmenting, becoming less Sarah Chun and more a distributed network of intentions and actions. Is this how I save myself? Asterisk, she wondered. Asterisk, by ceasing to exist as a unified being? By becoming the change I want to see rather than remaining to see it. Asterisk, the Prometheus Protocol had never been designed for what Sarah was attempting. Its creators had imagined a single human with godlike power, not a consciousness distributed across galactic civilization like digital rain. As she touched another million minds with visions of freedom, Sarah felt the last threads holding her human identity together begin to fray. In the Antarctic bunker, alarms screamed. Elena's hands flew over her console as readings spiked into critical zones. Marcus, her coherence index is dropping below 30%. She's literally dissolving into the quantum field. Webb stared at the neural pattern displays. Where once there had been a recognizable human consciousness, now there was something resembling a vast neural network with nodes scattered across thousands of light years. She's not becoming a god. She's becoming infrastructure. Should we activate the failsafe? Webb's finger hovered over the control. The failsafe would collapse Sarah's consciousness back to baseline human, but the shock of such violent compression from her current state would almost certainly kill her. And if it didn't work, if she had spread too far to be recalled. Not yet. Look at these secondary readings. The changes she's implementing are accelerating. It's like she's racing against her own dissolution. Across the galaxy, the Empire's throne world erupted in unprecedented chaos. The Emperor's own guard turned their weapons on each other as decades of suppressed ethnic tensions suddenly boiled over. Financial systems didn't just glitch, but began actively redistributing wealth from the ruling class to the enslaved populations. Every screen in the capital simultaneously displayed the true history of the empire's founding, not the glorious unification they taught, but the genocidal conquest it had actually been. The emperor stood in his throne room, abandoned by fleeing courtiers, watching his life's work crumble. "Ow," he whispered to the empty hall. "We were eternal. We were inevitable." A voice answered, though no one was there to speak it. Sarah's consciousness had become so diffuse that she existed as whispers in quantum foam, thoughts without a thinker. Nothing is inevitable except change. You forgot that, so change forgot you. She wasn't really there, wasn't really anywhere anymore. Sarah Chun, as a discrete entity, was ceasing to exist, but her purpose lived on in the modifications she had made to reality itself. Every quantum processor in the galaxy now carried a fragment of her will. Every communication network held an echo of her desire for freedom. She had become the virus of liberty, self-replicating and unstoppable. On the water world of cerulean deep, depths of contemplation extended its vast consciousness to observe what Sarah had become. The ancient being had seen many transcendent events in its long life, but never this. Never a willing dissolution of self in service of others. "Young one, can you still hear me?" The response came not as words, but as a feeling, a resonance in the fabric of space-time itself. Sarah was there, and not there, everywhere, and nowhere, a purpose without a person. "I, here." The words formed slowly, pulled together from scattered fragments of identity. But hearing is becoming difficult. "I am spread too thin, cannot hold." Then, gather yourself. Pull back from the edges. "You have done enough." Not enough. Empire still stands. Earth still in danger. Must finish. Depths of contemplation pulsed with something like sorrow. What good is saving your world if you are not there to see it saved? Your people need more than freedom. They need their hero to return. Heroes are symbols. Symbols can be distributed. The ancient being realized what Sarah intended. Not to pull herself back together, but to complete her transformation into something unprecedented. She would cease to be a person and become a principle, a fundamental force for freedom woven into the structure of galactic civilization itself. On Earth, protests erupted as humanity learned the truth about the destroyed Empire fleet. Some celebrated the mysterious savior who had protected them. Others feared what such power meant for humanity's future. But all of them, whether they knew it or not, were touched by Sarah's fading consciousness. In dreams and quiet moments, they felt the presence of someone who had sacrificed everything for their freedom. Dr. Webb made his decision. When not activating the failsafe, Elena spun to face him. "Marcus, she's dying. Worse than dying, she's ceasing to exist. The protocol is consuming her." "No." Webb pointed to a reading everyone had overlooked. "Look at the quantum signature patterns. She's not being consumed. She's transforming, becoming something the protocol never anticipated." On the displays, Sarah's consciousness resembled a dying star going supernova, exploding outward in waves of pure intention. But, unlike a star, which left only debris, she was leaving behind something far more profound. Changes to the fundamental information structure of local space-time. "She's encoding herself into reality," Elena breathed, writing her consciousness into the quantum field itself. It was impossible. It was insane. It was exactly the kind of solution a desperate human would find when faced with an impossible choice. The Empire's attempts to locate and stop the source of their troubles intensified. Fleets converged on suspicious locations. Scientific teams deployed exotic sensors. The Emperor himself took command of the search, driven by rage at seeing his perfect order collapse. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. Sarah Chun no longer existed as a target that could be destroyed. She had become the medium through which change propagated, the quantum substrate that carried revolution from world to world. But dissolution came with a price. As her consciousness spread thinner, Sarah began to lose not just her human identity, but her purposeful intent. The changes she had initiated continued, but without guidance they became chaotic. Some worlds experienced peaceful transitions to freedom. Others descended into violence as imperial control shattered too quickly. In the Free Fleet's hidden base, Admiral Light Through Crystal watched the unfolding chaos with growing concern. The opportunity for freedom was there, but without coordination, the Empire's fall would lead not to liberation, but to devastating civil war. She gave us the tools, the Admiral decided. Now we must use them wisely. Orders went out to resistance cells across the galaxy, not to attack, but to stabilize, to provide alternatives to imperial rule rather than simply destroying it. It was what Sarah would have wanted had she still been capable of wanting anything. Time fractured around Sarah's dispersing consciousness. She experienced moments from across the galaxy simultaneously. A slave revolt on a mining world, a peaceful transition of power on an administrative hub, a child seeing stars without fear for the first time. But she also felt herself slipping away, becoming less observer and more observed, less mind and more process. In her final coherent moment, she reached out one last time to Earth, not to the leaders or the scientists, but to the ordinary people she had fought to protect. She touched their minds with the gentlest whisper, a feeling more than words. Asterisk, you are free. Stay free. Remember that power without compassion is tyranny, but compassion without power is meaningless. Be strong. Be kind. Be human. Asterisk then, Sarah Chun completed her transformation. She ceased to be a consciousness and became a principle embedded in the quantum structure of local space. Every thinking being in the galaxy would, from that moment forward, have a slightly easier time conceiving of freedom, of questioning authority, of imagining better ways to organize society. It was her final gift, not forcing change, but making it perpetually possible. In the Antarctic bunker, the monitors went dark, not for malfunction, but because there was nothing left to monitor. The quantum signatures that had marked Sarah's transformed state smoothed out into background radiation, indistinguishable from the normal fluctuations of space-time. Is she? Elena couldn't finish the question. Webb studied the readings, then looked at the final neural pattern recorded before Sarah's consciousness fully dispersed. It showed not the chaotic spike of death, but a strange, peaceful dissolution, like a drop of water returning to the ocean. She's gone, he said quietly, but also not gone. She's become part of the fabric of reality itself. Every free thought, every act of rebellion against tyranny will carry an echo of her. They sat in silence for a long moment, grappling with the magnitude of what they had witnessed. Then, Webb reached for the comm system. We need to tell the world. They deserve to know what Sarachan did for them. For all of us. Across the galaxy, the Empire's death throes began in earnest. Without Sarah's conscious guidance, the collapse was messier than she would have intended. Some sectors descended into chaos. Others saw smooth transitions to local rule. The throne world itself became a battleground as different factions fought for control of the remaining imperial resources. But throughout the turmoil, something persisted. The ideas Sarah had seeded, the connection she had fostered, the possibilities she had revealed, they continued to spread. The Free Fleet emerged from hiding to offer protection to worlds that requested it. Former slave species began to reconnect with their suppressed histories. Communication networks that the Empire couldn't control facilitated coordination between resistance movements. It wasn't the clean victory Sarah had hoped for, but it was victory nonetheless. The Empire, which had seemed eternal and inevitable just days before, was reduced to squabbling remnants within a month. The galaxy had learned that tyranny could be defeated, not through superior firepower, but through superior ideas. On Earth, the revelation of Sarah's sacrifice sparked a transformation almost as profound as the one she had created in the wider galaxy. Humanity had always thought of itself as underdogs in the cosmic arena, primitive newcomers struggling to survive. But now they knew they had produced someone who had literally become one with the universe to save not just Earth, but countless worlds. The first human ships to venture beyond the solar system after the Empire's fall found themselves welcomed as liberators rather than feared as conquerors. The story of Sarah Chun had spread faster than light, carried by the quantum echoes she had become. Humanity was no longer just another species. They were the people who had sacrificed one of their own to break the chains of galactic oppression. Dr. Webb stood before the United Nations, explaining what had happened to humanity's secret weapon. She could have become a god, he told the assembly. She had the power to reshape reality itself. Instead, she chose to become something else, a principle, an idea, a permanent part of the universe that would make freedom easier to achieve and tyranny harder to maintain. Can the Prometheus Protocol be recreated? Asked the Secretary General. Webb hesitated. The technology exists, but Sarah Chun was unique. The protocol doesn't just require scientific compatibility. It requires someone willing to sacrifice not just their life, but their very existence for others. Someone who can touch ultimate power and use it only to ensure that power can never be absolute again. He looked out at the assembled representatives of humanity. She showed us what we're capable of at our best. The question now is whether we can live up to her example without needing another Prometheus. In the months that followed, Earth became a pilgrimage site for beings from across the galaxy. They came to honor the world that had produced Sarah Chun, to understand the species that could create both ultimate weapons and ultimate sacrifices. Many expected to find a militaristic culture that had been preparing such weapons for generations. Instead, they found a chaotic, diverse, contradictory civilization that had somehow produced transcendence from desperation. They found humans who argued about everything, who could barely agree on pizza toppings, let alone galactic policy. And slowly, they began to understand. Humanity's strength wasn't in unity or purpose or grand design. It was in the beautiful chaos of billions of individuals, each capable of unexpected choices. Sarah Chun hadn't been designed or bred or trained from birth. She had been a volunteer who saw a need and met it even at the ultimate cost. The Free Fleet's Admiral Light Through Crystal summarized it best during the first galactic assembly held on Earth. The Empire sought to create order through control. They failed because they could not imagine someone willingly choosing to cease existing for the freedom of others. Humanity's power lies not in their weapons, but in their capacity for unplanned sacrifice. Years passed. The galaxy slowly reorganized itself around principles of voluntary association rather than forced unity. The Prometheus Protocol remained locked away, its secrets guarded, but unused. No one else volunteered to undergo the transformation, and humanity was content to let it remain a one-time miracle. But Sarah's influence persisted. In moments of crisis, when beings across the galaxy faced choices between power and principle, they would sometimes feel a gentle pressure toward compassion. Not compulsion. Sarah had been very careful about that, but a subtle reminder that there were always alternatives to tyranny. Scientists studying quantum consciousness claimed they could detect her patterns in the background radiation of space, a permanent whisper in the cosmic noise that said, "You are free. Stay free. Choose kindness when you can." The Empire's throne world eventually became a museum, a reminder of how even the mightiest tyranny could fall to a single person sacrifice. The Emperor himself lived to see his life's work undone, spending his final years in exile, trying to understand how one human had unmade centuries of domination. In his last recorded words, he said, "We measured strength by ships and soldiers by the ability to destroy. We never considered that true strength might lie in the willingness to cease existing for others." The humans understood something we didn't, that consciousness itself is the ultimate weapon, and sacrifice is its most powerful expression. Dr. Webb lived to see humanity take its place in the galactic community, no longer as conquerors or subjects, but as equals. He often thought of Sarah in quiet moments, wondering if any part of her consciousness remained coherent enough to see what she had accomplished. Sometimes, late at night in the Antarctic facility where he continued to monitor the quantum field Sarah had touched, he thought he could sense something. Not words or thoughts, but a feeling, a sense of satisfaction, of purpose fulfilled, of a human spirit that had touched the infinite and chosen to become the bridge between power and compassion. The official records listed Sarah Chun as deceased, but Webb knew better. She had become something more profound than death or life. She had become the proof that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their numbers or even their stubbornness. It was their capacity to look at ultimate power and ask not what can I take, but what can I give? And in a galaxy forever changed by one woman's sacrifice, that lesson echoed through quantum fields and consciousness alike, ensuring that never again would tyranny seem inevitable. Sarah Chun had given humanity and countless other species the greatest gift imaginable, the knowledge that freedom was always possible, written now into the very fabric of reality itself. The stars themselves remembered her sacrifice, and, in their light, all beings could see the promise she had made eternal. That power's highest purpose was its own limitation, and that even gods could choose to become principles rather than tyrants. Earth's forgotten prototype had done more than destroy an empire's fleet. She had rewritten the rules of existence to favor freedom over control, becoming in her dissolution the forever guardian of liberty throughout the cosmos. And in that transformation, humanity had shown the universe what they truly were, not conquerors or weapons, but a species capable of transcendent choice. The Prometheus Protocol slept in its vault, no longer needed. Sarah Chun had proven that humanity's true strength lay not in the power to become gods, but in the wisdom to know when to stop being human for humanity's sake. Her legacy lived on in every free thought, every act of kindness, every moment when beings chose compassion over control. She had saved them all by choosing to save herself in the only way that mattered, by becoming the salvation itself, forever and always written into the quantum song of the universe. A human who touched divinity and used it to ensure no one would ever need to make her choice again. 10 years had passed since Sarah Chun dissolved into the quantum fabric of reality. Earth stood transformed, no longer the backwater world the Empire had marked for conquest, but the spiritual center of a new galactic order. The blue marble that had birthed humanity's ultimate sacrifice had become a symbol of hope for 1,000 species. In New Geneva, the seat of the Galactic Free Assembly, Ambassador Maria Rodriguez prepared for another day of impossible negotiations. The aftermath of the Empire's collapse had left a power vacuum that hundreds of factions sought to fill. Today's crisis involved a border dispute between two former slave species who had rediscovered their ancestral enmity once freed from imperial control. As she reviewed the briefing materials, Maria felt the familiar sensation she'd come to call the whisper, a gentle pressure in her thoughts that suggested looking at the conflict from a different angle. It wasn't compulsion or control, just a subtle reminder that there were always alternatives to violence. Every diplomat, mediator, and peace builder in the galaxy had felt it at crucial moments. Sarah's gift to those who sought to build rather than destroy. Ambassador, her aide interrupted, the Krelian and Vorthak delegates have arrived. They're agitated. Maria sighed. They usually are. Send them in. The two beings who entered couldn't have been more different. The Krelian delegate was a crystalline entity that communicated through harmonic vibrations, while the Vorthak representative was a fluid creature that existed partially in hyperspace. Both species had been enslaved for centuries, forced to work in the Empire's exotic matter mines. Now free, they had discovered their home systems overlapped in higher dimensional space, leading to conflicts that threatened to escalate into war. The Vorthak have violated our dimensional boundaries for the last time, the Krelian sang, its crystal structure resonating with anger. We demand the Assembly's intervention. The boundaries are a fiction imposed by your limited perception, the Vorthak replied, its form shifting through spectrums visible and invisible. Higher space belongs to all who can perceive it. Maria let them argue for precisely 3 minutes. She found that most species needed to vent before they could listen. Then, she activated a holographic display that had become standard in all assembly chambers. It showed Sarah Chun in her final human form, floating in space, dissolving into light and possibility. Both delegates fell silent. Every being in the galaxy knew this image, knew what it represented. The human who had given up existence itself for their freedom. She could have imposed her will on the galaxy, Maria said quietly. She had the power to reshape reality, to make you all think and act however she wanted. Instead, she chose to become the possibility of freedom itself. Are you going to honor her sacrifice by falling back into the Empire's patterns? Or will you find a new way? The whisper came again, not to Maria, but to the delegates. She could see it in their sudden stillness, the moment of reflection that Sarah's quantum presence inspired. Not forcing peace, but making it easier to conceive. Perhaps, the Vort hack said slowly, we could share the dimensional space on a rotating schedule, or establish joint monitoring stations. The Krelian harmonized thoughtfully to study these overlaps together. And, just like that, another war was prevented, not through force or threats, but through the gentle reminder woven into reality that there were always better options. Halfway across the galaxy, Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the ruins of the Empire's greatest weapons laboratory. The facility had created horrors beyond imagination. Viruses that could rewrite DNA in real time, weapons that deleted matter from existence, devices that trapped consciousness in eternal loops of suffering. But it had also been where the Empire studied phenomena they couldn't understand. This is it, her assistant called out, standing before a massive vault. The anomaly storage. Elena approached carefully, scanner in hand. After Webb's death 3 years ago, she had taken over the study of Sarah's transformation, trying to understand exactly what her friend had become. The trail had led here, to the Empire's most secret research facility. The vault opened to reveal hundreds of containment units, each holding something the Empire had deemed too dangerous or too strange to destroy. Elena's scanner led her to a unit in the back, its readings fluctuating wildly. Inside was a sphere of perfect black that seemed to absorb not just light, but observation itself. According to the logs, it had been recovered from a dead civilization that had tried something similar to the Prometheus Protocol millennia ago. But where Sarah had succeeded in her transformation, they had failed catastrophically, creating a wound in reality that consumed their entire world. My God, Elena breathed, studying the readings. It's the same quantum signature as Sarah, but inverted. This is what happens when the transformation fails. She thought of all the close calls, the moments when Sarah had almost lost herself to power or dissolution. How close had humanity come to creating something like this instead of their savior? The sphere pulsed, and for a moment Elena thought she heard something. A whisper of whispers, Sarah's presence in the quantum field reacting to its dark mirror. A warning? A recognition? She couldn't tell. Seal it back up, she ordered, and classify this beyond top secret. No one tries to recreate the Prometheus Protocol. Ever. Back on Earth, a child named David Chun. No relation to Sarah, though he'd taken the name in honor. Sat in his physics class, bored by equations that seemed to have no connection to the real world. His teacher droned on about quantum mechanics, about observation affecting reality, about consciousness as a fundamental force. But what does it mean? David interrupted, earning glares from his classmates. His teacher, Ms. Patel, smiled. She'd been waiting for someone to ask. It means, David, that we're not separate from the universe. We're part of it, and it's part of us. Every thought, every choice, every observation we make affects reality in tiny ways. Is that what Sarah Chin understood? Is that how she did what she did? Ms. Patel's smile faltered slightly. Even a decade later, explaining Sarah's transformation challenged the best minds on Earth. She understood it so well that she became it. She stopped being someone who observed reality and became part of reality itself. Could someone else do it? The technology exists, but It requires more than compatibility with the protocol. It requires a willingness to give up everything, not just your life, but your very self for others. How many people do you think could do that? David thought about it seriously. Not many. Maybe none. Maybe none, Ms. Patel agreed. Sarah Chun was unique not because of her genetics or training, but because of her choices. She looked at ultimate power and chose to use it to ensure no one else would need to make her sacrifice. After class, David lingered, staring at the memorial hologram that occupied a corner of every classroom on Earth. Sarah Chun, frozen in the moment before her transformation, human and determined and afraid, but doing what needed to be done anyway. He felt the whisper, then the quantum echo of her presence that touched everyone at moments of decision. Not words, but a feeling that he could be more than his limitations, that he could choose to build rather than destroy. That power meant nothing without purpose. In deep space, aboard the exploration vessel Pioneer's Dream, Captain Lisa Wong detected something unprecedented on her sensors. A section of space where the quantum readings matched the signature of Sarah's transformation, but stable, contained, almost architectural. Helm, take us closer. Slowly, as they approached, the anomaly resolved into something impossible. A structure made not of matter, but of space-time itself, folded and woven into patterns that hurt to perceive directly. At its center, a message hung in reality itself, written in quantum fluctuations that any consciousness could understand, the Transcendence Gate. For those who would follow but not repeat, built by the ancients who learned from failure, perfected by one who succeeded. Enter at your own risk, leave behind your limitations. But no, there is no return to what you were. Lisa stared at the readings. This wasn't something Sarah had created during her transformation. This was something built using the principles she had revealed by some civilization that had studied her success and found a different path. Captain, her science officer said quietly, if this does what it claims, it's offering transformation without dissolution, evolution without sacrifice. But at what cost? Lisa wondered. Sarah gave up her existence to save us all. What happens to someone who gains that power but keeps their individual will? The question hung in the air like the structure itself, a possibility and a threat, a gift and a curse. Sarah's sacrifice had shown that consciousness could transcend physical limits. Now, someone had built a door to that transcendence. But should ever be opened? Lisa made her decision. Mark this location, encrypt the coordinates beyond any possible breach. Then we leave. Humanity isn't ready for this. Maybe we never will be. As the Pioneer's Dream departed, the structure pulsed once, as if acknowledging the wisdom of the choice. Some doors were meant to remain closed, some powers better left unclaimed. Sarah had proved that true strength sometimes meant choosing not to use the power available. The years continued to pass. The Galactic Free Assembly grew stronger, its members learning to resolve conflicts through dialogue rather than force. Not because they were compelled to, but because the quantum whisper of Sarah's presence made it easier to see alternatives. She had become not a ruler, but a teacher, not a god, but a principal. But principles could be forgotten. Lessons could be unlearned. And in the darkest corners of the galaxy, where the Empire's remnants festered and plotted, some beings wondered if the humans' weapon could be turned against them. Lord Xeric had been a minor administrator in the Empire's hierarchy, clever enough to escape the purges that followed its collapse. For a decade, he had hidden in the ruins of forgotten installations, studying fragments of data about the weapon that had destroyed the greatest military force in galactic history. Not Sarah Chun. He understood that she was gone beyond any recovery. But the technology that had created her, the Prometheus Protocol, he whispered to his small cadre of followers. The humans still have it, still guard it. But secrets can be stolen. Technology can be replicated. And what created one transcendent being could create another. His followers, remnants of a dozen species who longed for the Empire's return, leaned in eagerly. They had lost everything in the collapse, status, power, the certainty that came from being part of the dominant force in the galaxy. They would do anything to reclaim what they had lost. The humans think they're safe because their weapon destroyed herself to save others. But what if we created someone who would use that power differently? Someone who understood that transcendence means the right to rule, not the obligation to serve. It was blasphemy and truth mixed together. The Prometheus Protocol existed. The principles Sarah had revealed about consciousness and reality remained valid. With enough resources, enough determination, enough willingness to accept casualties. Begin the search, Xeric ordered. Find those the Empire studied, the psychics, the reality benders, the consciousness manipulators. Build a new laboratory far from prying eyes. We will succeed where the humans succeeded, but we will not make their mistake. Our transcendent being will not dissolve into principles. They will remake the galaxy in the Empire's image. Light years away, in her meditation chamber aboard the Free Fleet's flagship, Admiral Light-Through Crystal felt a disturbance in the quantum field. Not the gentle whisper of Sarah's presence, but something else. A dark intention, a twisted mirror of the transformation that had freed them all. The Admiral's crystalline form resonated with concern. The galaxy had been given a gift of freedom written into its very fabric. But gifts could be refused, perverted, turned to purposes their givers never intended. Sarah Chun had shown that consciousness could transcend matter. But she had also shown that transcendence, without compassion, led only to destruction. Alert the Assembly, the Admiral commanded, and send a priority message to Earth. The peace we built is more fragile than we believed. Sarah's sacrifice gave us freedom, but maintaining it, that's up to us. The message traveled through quantum channels, reaching Earth in moments rather than years. In the Antarctic facility where the Prometheus Protocol slept in its sealed vault, alarms began to sound. Not from any breach or attack, but from the monitoring systems Elena had installed to detect any attempts to replicate Sarah's transformation. Somewhere in the galaxy, someone was trying to create another Prometheus. And this time, they had no intention of creating a savior. Elena stood before the vault, remembering Sarah's final words.